Okay, so diving right in today, we're looking at Signalgate. It's a whole thing.
Yeah, layers and layers.
Exactly. And it just keeps getting weirder, to be honest. But we've been digging into some analysis that really focuses in on one specific question. And that question is, was the Biden administration actually responsible for the way the Signal app was used in a way that ultimately led to a leak? Because this idea was, well, it was put out there, right, by John Ratcliffe, former Trump CIA director.
All right, during a Senate hearing, no.
Yeah, a Senate hearing. So it's his claims that we're going to try and unpack today.
Right.
Try to make sense of it all.
Yeah. It's definitely an angle that deserves a closer look, especially when you consider the whole timeline involved here. I mean, you have the former head of the CIA under Trump suggesting that a former vice president, Biden, who wasn't even in office at the time, was somehow to blame. Like,
right.
How does that even work? It raises so many questions.
It really does. So let's start, I guess, with what Ratcliffe actually said in that hearing. At least according to the good folks over at the Ring of Fire on YouTube, whose analysis we've been looking at.
Yeah.
So Ratcliffe claimed that when he first took over as CIA director, one of the first things that happened was officials loading Signal onto his work computer.
Setting the stage, right. He's not making himself the instigator here. He's saying, look, this was already happening when I got there.
Right. And he said he was told that it was, acceptable for certain work purposes. But here's where his statement takes a kind of interesting turn. He alleged that this whole using Signal thing, it preceded the current administration to the Biden administration.
Wow.
Yeah. And he even went as far as to say that because Biden and everybody was using Signal, it ended up being installed on his computer practically on day one.
So the connection he's making is pretty direct, right? He's suggesting that because Signal was so widely used during, the Biden years, even when Biden was out of office, it created this culture, this precedent that then led to it being used within the CIA when Ratcliffe, got there. It's like he's laying out this chain of events.
Yeah. And he actually even put it this way. He only had it because Biden's people were using it. So it's a pretty strong accusation. He's basically pointing the finger at a previous administration for a practice that he encountered later on.
Right.
But this is where the analysis we've been looking at, this is where it gets really interesting because it presents a very different perspective.
Yeah.
A real counter-narrative, you could say.
Yeah, and what I find really compelling about the YouTube commentary is how skeptical they are of Ratcliffe's reasoning right from the start. Like, they immediately push back on that. And they use this really great analogy. They ask, would you jump off a bridge just because everyone else was doing it?
Right.
It's such a simple point, but it's so effective. It really highlights how flawed that logic is, Just because other people are doing something doesn't make it right, especially when we're talking about something as serious as security protocols and a government agency.
It's the heart of the matter, isn't it? Like, why are we doing this just because everyone else is?
Yeah.
It makes you question the whole justification, especially, like you said, when you're dealing with really sensitive information.
Yeah.
But the counter argument goes even further than that, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. Because the analysis actually brings in some direct evidence, some pretty significant stuff.
Yeah, they bring in quotes from intelligence community officials, people who are actually there. And these quotes, they offer a completely different view of how the Biden administration approached messaging apps. It really starts to make Ratcliffe's claims look questionable, to say the least.
This is the key point. So according to a former top national security official who's quoted in the transcript, and I really want to emphasize this, we were not allowed to have any messaging apps on our work phones, and under no circumstances were unclassified messaging apps allowed to be used for transmission of classified material.
That's pretty clear.
It's a really strong statement, right? It directly contradicts Ratcliffe's whole claim that the Biden administration was somehow promoting, or widely using Signal for government business.
Yeah, if this official is telling the truth, and they would know, right, they were there.
Exactly.
Then it means the reality was the exact opposite of what Ratcliffe is suggesting.
Okay, so let's think about what this means. If the Biden administration actually had a policy against using these unclassified messaging apps like Signal for classified information, then Ratcliffe's whole idea that Signal's presence at the CIA was because of their widespread use, it just doesn't hold up.
Right.
There's a disconnect, between his account and what this former official is saying was the e-tref taboo, the actual policy.
Totally. And that's what leads the YouTube commentator to use some pretty strong language, you know.
Okay.
They call Ratcliffe's statement misdirection at its worst, and they even suggest he could be lying under oath to the Senate, which is, well, perjury.
That's a huge accusation.
It is, but it comes directly from this contradiction. If you have credible sources within the intelligence community stating that the Biden administration was actually restricting the use of these apps, then Ratcliffe's claim about their widespread use starts to look like a deliberate attempt to deflect blame.
To protect someone else.
Potentially, yeah.
And the analysis also talks about this potential lack of accountability, right? Like, will anyone actually be held responsible for this?
Well, they point out that, you know, with the Senate being controlled by Republicans at the time of Ratcliffe's testimony, it's unlikely that he'll face any serious consequences. And the same goes for some of the other people who've been connected to this whole Signal Gate situation, people like Tulsi Gabbard, Heath, and Mike Walt.
Right. So no one's going to get in trouble.
It doesn't seem like it.
And they even suggest that a real, thorough, impartial investigation might not even happen until, you know, the political landscape changes. Like maybe after Trump is out of office.
Which is a worry, right? Because by
Right.
then, who knows if people will even care anymore. It's like the whole thing with the Capitol riot, you know? There was all this outrage at first, and then it just sort of faded away. It's hard to keep that momentum going.
It is. So, okay, to be clear, this analysis, it does point the finger at some specific individuals.
Name names?
Ratcliffe, obviously, Gabbard, Heath. And they specifically say that Mike Walt bears a lot of blame.
Right. But it's also important to note who they specifically say is not to blame.
Biden and Goldberg.
Exactly. And
Right.
that's the core of their argument. The responsibility for all of this, for the security practices around Signal, it lies with the administration that was in power when those practices were put in place.
Okay, so to recap this whole thing, the Ring of Fire analysis is basically saying, look, the Biden administration wasn't at fault for this Signal situation. In fact, they had policies in place that were more strict, not less. Which leads to the suggestion that Ratcliffe might be trying to shift the blame away from whoever was actually responsible.
That's the implication, yeah. And it's a serious one. I mean, they're essentially accusing him of lying to Congress.
Which, wow, it makes you wonder, right?
True.
What's the real story here, and who can we even trust?
That's the big question, isn't it? When you have these conflicting accounts and allegations of perjury, it just highlights how difficult it can be to get to the truth, especially when politics are involved.
Absolutely. So we really encourage you, our listeners, to think critically about all of this. Don't just take our word for it. Go check out the sources, do your own research, and come to your own conclusions, because there's a lot at stake here.
Yeah. This deep dive, it's just one piece of the puzzle. The Signal Gate situation, it's still unfolding. There's a lot more to learn and a lot more questions to ask.
Exactly. So keep questioning, keep searching, and thanks for joining us for this deep dive. We'll be back soon to explore another messy, complicated issue.
Because there's never a shortage of those.
Never a shortage.